Okay, welcome for our second hour of the late afternoon, early evening show. We got a lot to get to, and so let's get right on to Caroline Wren. Caroline, I've said now in the morning show and throughout the day, I've been in all these meetings, and I keep telling people from what I'm hearing, the knives are out. This is I need the Warren posse to just sit and listen and take this in, and then we're going to come up with a plan of action. But the knives are out for President Trump like I've never seen the knives out in my life since this indictment, which is bringing MAGA together more than it's ever been pulled together before. But the donor class and the political operatives, knowing that they failed in their first attempt to unseat President Trump in this primary, the failed Murdoch primary process, they're now trying more than ever. Just give us your take on things right now, since you're always inside baseball on this stuff.
I think we're seeing the uniparty like fully at work right now. And the responses from the different primary candidates to the indictment yesterday was pretty telling. I mean, DeSantis's response was a joke. He managed to piss off both the Never Trump and the pro-Trump crowd. And so once again, DeSantis is trying to walk this like invisible line to where I suspect actually he drops in the polls after this. And I believe that at least like 20 to 30% of people that were saying they were DeSantis come back home to President Trump as a result of this. The Tim Scott response was Tim says basically nothing. He actually, I guess, was a little more defensive of President Trump than I expected from even a Tim Scott. And then you have Mike Pence, who, I mean, boy, did Trump turn out to be right about that guy with just a completely ridiculous statement. It was quite clear from the indictment that the majority of that was coming from Pence during it. I think this was all kind of a plot and a way to have him then run for president so he could tell his side of the story. He's not going to move anywhere in the numbers, and his numbers also aren't going to collapse because he is at 1%. So this doesn't change anything in the primary field other than I think Trump becomes a little bit stronger. But this is all by design. This is the weaponization of the left and the uniparty against Trump. And what they're attempting to do is to cause chaos and also bankrupt us. And there was just a story out in Politico today about how several of the state parties are completely bankrupt. The RNC is bankrupt. They're attempting to bankrupt the Trump campaign by, forcing him to have to spend $40 million plus in legal fees. This is all the purpose. And while this is going on, instead of donors stepping up and investing in the party, in our infrastructure, and President Trump, they're spending $275 million in a primary that is already over. And none of that money is going to be spent to help the Michigan GOP, the Georgia GOP, the Arizona GOP, these clubs that need to get our get out the vote efforts starting now together. And it's upsetting, but not that surprising.
But this is all kind of inextricably linked, because the state parties, what Politico talked about, the state parties that are most in question are ones that have had kind of the precinct strategy of the grassroots take over. So the donors are going to sit there and say, okay, tough guys, you're going to take it over. I'm not writing any more checks. The business community is walking away, and these state parties, the RNCs for different. The RNCs for a different reason. The RNC is where the small donors, the Warren posse and others just said, we saw that fiasco on that election. We're not in, and we're not writing any more checks. They're still looking for something out there that they could write those checks for. So they're intricately linked, but they're two different reasons this is happening. The central point, and this goes to Pence. I think Pence. And I want to ask you, how's it going to play in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina when Pence is the lead witness for the prosecution? Mark Short of the Kochs has been in his ear saying, this is your path to the White House, right? All you got to do, you and Mother just have to sit there and sing sweet nothings to the evangelical crowd about how pure you are and how holy you are and how you read the Bible every day, and then just be a witness against Trump. And then Trump, his tweet was, no one that doesn't uphold the Constitution could ever be president. And Judas Pence is going to be the star witness for the prosecution. And it shouldn't be lost on people that Mark Short and the Koch connection, the Kochs just put $50 million into the Never Trump, Stop Trump movement, the 278 that was raised, ma'am.
Yep. The only place I disagree with you is that Mark Short telling Pence this is his path to the White House. There's no path to the White House for Mike Pence. What I do think is happening is Mark Short is telling him, this is your path to get a board seat with Boeing. This is your path to get a board seat on Name the University. This is your path to get $300,000 payouts to piece together from these different companies, and then to get a contributorship with Fox News or CNN. So that is what actually this is. This is a money-making scheme for Pence to kind of lay out his future endeavors so that he's set, because he will never be elected to office again. I would be shocked if Mike Pence is elected to his condo board association one day. So there's not an electoral path for anyone here who's wrong wrongfully standing up against President Trump. But we do need to figure out a way to help these parties. And our party is always been wrong in our structure. We are top down. What happens is they've solicited a bunch of big donors to the RNC, and then these state parties sit around and wait for a transfer from the RNC to their state parties, and that's how they live. And the RNC right now is having massive money-raising problems for a trillion reasons that we've talked about on your show. So these state parties are really squeezed for money as well, and the Democrats are so much better at funding their state and local groups and funding from the grassroots up, and we fund in a top-down strategy. So what I'm having do is I saw this coming a while ago, and I talked to Carrie Lake about it, and Carrie, being the leader and incredible person she is, said contact all these state parties and let's go do fundraisers for them. That's why Carrie held the largest fundraiser in the Georgia GOP history. She headlined. We immediately read about the Michigan problems. Christina Caramo talked to her, and so Carrie's going to go headline the Michigan GOP event in September, and she's going to keep doing that. That's why you see her on the road constantly. We are going to these state and local parties and say, use Carrie Lake as a tool to get money into your club.
What has to happen in the next 72 hours? Trump gets arraigned tomorrow. And by the way, I think we've worked it out. We had the great coverage in Miami, and I think we're going to have Natalie Winters and the team at the courthouse. We'll have live coverage all day long on War Room and Real America's Voice. Caroline, what has to happen in the next 72 hours to let the donor class know, and to let the Murdochs know, and to let the Kochs know that this is, because their whole move now behind the scenes is electability. Although Trump's been winning all this polls, they said, well, that can't happen, particularly going to adjudicate the 2020 election, which is a loser. This is the end of Trump. Tell the audience, what moves are they trying to make right now, and how can we thwart that?
I think that they are so terrified of Trump being back in office. That's why all this is happening. So when you ask about the electability question, look at the New York Times poll that just came out that showed Trump and Biden in it's dead tie. This is why they're in panic mode. Donald Trump is going to be reelected again. He is going to be president again. And that is why they're throwing 4, 5, 6 indictments at this man just in a panic attack. So that's something I've been telling to donors before. Is like, if you want to know why I think that Donald Trump is the most electable, look how panicked the left and even the establishment Republicans are about his name being on a ballot again. There is a reason why they're panicked about that. He is going to win. He is so great that he could just keep his head down. This is noise to him. This really is just noise. I mean, he is so good about rising above all of this. And, this indictment was ridiculous. They're basically indicting him over political speech. It will never stand. It's going to go to the appeals court, and then it'll make its way up to the Supreme Court, which will kill it. So we should not get distracted by stuff like this. President Trump isn't getting distracted, nor should we. We have to win the general election. We have to get the funds into these clubs and into these organizations that actually will do things on the ground to help. And we should stop being distracted by a primary that's already over. Stop being distracted by the number of indictments. We have to focus on how we help President Trump win in November.
Caroline, can you hang with us for a second? I want to bring in Brian Costello because I want to take another angle of this. Brian, you've been all over, and there's breaking news all day long. I want you to get up to speed because we haven't had a chance to have you on for a couple of days about quite frankly, I think one of the biggest financial scandals in the history of the country. Now, the Wall Street Journal has reported that Larry Fink and BlackRock are now under investigation because of the financing of the Chinese Communist Party in the PLA. But the railhead of all this, as bad as Larry Fink's been, the railhead of all this has been Sequoia Capital. And Sequoia Capital has a proven track record of trying to pay off both. I mean, they're 1,000% one of the biggest drivers of the Democratic Party, but they have selectively gone out and bought their way out of just thorough investigations by paying off members of the Republican Party. Walk us through the updates on the scandal that is Sequoia Capital.
Yeah, so it just came out that DeSantis' never back down pack, and you guys reported on this last night with Laura. Leone from Sequoia put $2 million into DeSantis' campaign. So what you're seeing right now, if you watch the flow of money from Sequoia, it's flowing into DeSantis. It's trying to find its pro-China candidate, and DeSantis has taken some, unusual positions in terms of backing down on the China tariffs, and he's also taking money from their Sequoia portfolio company, which is Citadel and Ken Griffin. So Sequoia funnels its money three ways: directly through Leone to the Republican Party, from Moritz to the Democratic Party. Then they have their portfolio company CEOs and their Silicon Valley relationships that give. And then they also have the limited investors in their funds who give. And we don't know who the limited investors are in the fund. So we do know one of them. One of them was the fraud FTX SBF guy had 200 million in Sequoia's funds, who was giving a bunch to the Democratic Party. And as we know, the election fraud allegations against him just surprisingly got dropped. So to get elected, the Dems or whoever's running against Trump, they need the China money. And that kind of all flows through the new vampire squid here, which is Sequoia.
Walk me through on that vampire squid for the Democrat side. Walk me through Moritz, the connections there, and then I want to go back to this DeSantis pack again, because people are oblivious to all this.
Yeah, the way we know the last election was interfered with, Steve, was, there are a number of ways, but one of the big things was putting the wrong information in the American people's hands related to the Biden corruption. Must we forget, right, that Sequoia owns 10% of TikTok. TikTok's on 150 million phones in the U.S. It hasn't been banned by Biden, and surprisingly, we don't even really hear about TikTok being banned anymore. In fact, he's having influences in the White House. And if you look at the money Moritz just gave, right, he gave it to he's not giving it to Biden, right? He's giving it to PAC that actually then go out and pay to disseminate information on social media. So there was actually a scandal, I think it was a year or two ago, which was a group that Moritz had given to before, who was actually trying to pay lawyer influencers to release misinformation across TikTok. And it was the same woman, Tara McGowan, who's an Obama operative. So what we need to be very careful of here is the misinformation being pushed out against Donald J. Trump, right? I personally think it's going to be Newsom that comes in, and it's not going to be Biden that he's running against, because we're starting to see the China money, Moritz and those guys behind him as well.
But I want to lay out the architectonics of this, because I'm going to get Caroline back in a second, who's been screaming about this. Moritz, with all the tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars they're taking out of profits, they're not funding them back in directly to the Democratic Party. They're putting it into Arabella and other these kind of C3s and C4s that are really, well, we reported on a couple of weeks ago, have $2 billion, have raised $2 billion in money. And that is the 2024 campaign. You can plug and play anybody. It could be Biden. It could be Newsom. It could be Michelle Obama. It could be Pritzker, you name it, right? But all this money is getting funneled into these C3s and C4s and other PACs that are essentially setting up the infrastructure for victory. At the same time, we've got the guys that give the tip money to the Republicans. You see them trying to put it in these things that it's like Ron DeSantis, swept, I think it was $80 million from his gubernatorial. A couple of $1 million of that was this Leon guy who's at Sequoia. But talk to me about the C3s and C4s, about they're putting money into these nonprofits and how much Moritz is generating for them.
Yeah, I mean, so Moritz has a nonprofit with his wife in California called Frank Start, right? It has 4.3 billion in assets. People can go look this up on ProPublica. If you look, much of the asset and much of the return is he's moved his investments into Sequoia's China funds over there. So the returns from TikTok and DGI and Sheen and all these companies will flow into this nonprofit foundation, Frank Start, which is funding all sorts of Democratic initiatives in programs in different states. One of the things it's funding is the ACLU, who's used lawfare, to end the DOJ China initiative. At the end of the day, Steve, there's trillions of dollars in China right now that the uniparty and elite want to get out. And to do it, they have to cover up crimes in the administration. They have to do all sorts of stuff to get that money out to keep themselves into power.
Why is the Republicans control the House? This is one of the biggest financial scandals. This makes Teapot Dome look like somebody taking lunch money from a kid at his lemonade stand. Why is the Republican Party that controls House intelligence, controls oversight, controls judiciary, controls all of these? Why is there been a suppression of any investigation about Sequoia, given that they're one of the major funders of the Democratic Party? How does that work?
I mean, I think it's the same reason that the only step up the Russia folks and the Russia collusion was, many of the people you have on the show, right? Devin Nunes, Cash, Colonel Harvey, Colonel Pappas, right? They don't want to take on the administrative state. If you look, Lisa Monaco's sitting in a pole position to know all this stuff at the Attorney General's office. Jake Sullivan, who runs the National Security Council and, was working for Hillary's campaign during the hoax. He had Kurt Campbell on his team actually meet with Sequoia, right? They know that Sequoia, TikTok, its investments, the tech donor money is there. So that these guys are smart enough to leak enough money into the GOP and compromise people in the GOP and the Uniparty like McCarthy and different people. And then they don't want to take it on because they're worried of the wrath of the DOJ, Lisa Monaco and Jake Sullivan in the National Security Council. And remember, Sullivan's wife,
Lisa Monaco. When you talk about all these investigations of Trump, the railhead of all those, of Jack Smith and all this other stuff, Lisa Monaco runs the deal at DOJ, correct? She's essentially like the chief operating officer. Yeah,
if you look at all the scandals, across the last several years, you see those two names that come across everything: Lisa Monaco and Jake Sullivan at the National Security Council. And Neil Shen. Sullivan was paid by Neil Shen and Sequoia back in 2017 when he was sitting on the bench at Yale to go over and speak there. So these guys know exactly who Sequoia is and what's going on. And I don't know if you want to play it. We have a clip where Senator Sullivan, revealed the open secret in Washington.
Yeah, let's go and play Dan Sullivan of Alaska. Let's play that clip.
You mentioned smart capital. The more that I dig into this, senior Democrats in the Biden administration, senior Republicans from the Trump administration have all mentioned to me with alarm this issue of American financiers, private equity, big banks. They mention Sequoia Capital all the time, BlackRock. These are Americans who've gotten super rich. We're a capitalistic society. But they knowingly are financing our competitor, the PLA, AI. They've funded the rise of China. This is a concern I'm hearing about all the time. Can you talk about these firms, others, and what we should do to stop it? China doesn't have this problem. They don't have billionaire Chinese funding us. But we have this problem. And I'm going to start naming names. It's unpatriotic. It's a real problem. I'm hearing it from Democrats and Republicans. Can you unpack that a little bit more? How damaging are these American companies to American interests?
Senator, I do think that that trend of growing flows of capital, and I think there's both dumb money and smart money, but both of them are very useful.
I wouldn't call money smart if it's, maybe these guys are going to get rich, but I don't think it's smart if it's funding our chief adversary globally.
I think it's one of our most potent advantages that we are not actually.
How do we stop these American financiers from funding the Communist Party of China?
I think that congressional oversight of the Treasury Department, hard oversight, riding them hard to expand, like I said, by orders of magnitude, the blacklist of companies that Americans are allowed to invest in China is one. I think we should be looking at a CFIUS-like body for outbound investment so that we screen outbound American investment headed towards China to make sure that it's not damaging our national interest and national security.
You've heard us preach the gospel of that. What we need is criminal indictments and going after people is what you need. Brian Costello, if we got the appropriate investigations going at House Intel right now or at oversight right now, you wouldn't have this problem. Why is that not happening, Brian Costello?
I mean, listen, this is, DeSantis chose to take, this isn't an open secret that Sequoia is funding the Chinese Communist Party and has been for years. And DeSantis chose to make that one of his top donors. Biden's consistently taken money from Moritz, pro-Biden and Democratic operations. So we have the ability to subpoena right now. If you notice, Sullivan mentioned BlackRock. Gallagher and the committee just came out with an investigation into BlackRock, but for some reason, the first company they mentioned, Sequoia, there's no subpoena. Nobody's subpoenaing them. And I'll tell you, Steve, Lisa Monaco and Jake Sullivan have the ability right now to stop Neil Shen, Sequoia, and $2 trillion in companies in China being created directly aligned against U.S. initiatives And instead, they're choosing to use their resources to knock out their political opponent, Donald Trump, and keep the China money still funding. So Congress knows that the DOJ has everything it needs to stop this, but yet they're doing nothing.
Brian, how do people get to you? Where do they go on social media? Because you're putting up great stuff on this every day.
Twitter, BP Costello. And thank you to you and Steve in the War Room. I think history will show us this is more important than people realize.
No. This is the people. Look, our audience is on it. We're going to keep pounding. I think we're a lot closer than people think of having a big break here. So, Brian, keep pounding.
Thanks, Steve. Take care. Bye.
Caroline, one of the reasons I'm so upset about this kind of phony, the Keebler elves, is that there's not really a purpose to any of these campaigns except stop Trump. And that was personified the other day by the pathetic, and I've got a picture. I don't have it to Memphis, so maybe I'll show it tomorrow. There was a photo in New Hampshire before DeSantis got up and spoke about his economic talk. There was like 30 people there. I mean, it was sad. But his economic speech was so juvenile and so infantile. It was just kind of like hanging 10 points, nothing tied together. He had such profound statements as, I'm going to cut federal spending. He had more profound statements that I'm going to stop China from having an abusive relationship with us. I mean, these were like it. These were like these great pearls of wisdom he was dropping. How does a guy like that end up that wants to present himself as a populist? How does he end up taking this money from Leon into, swept up into his governance thing and then shifted over to his PAC? And his political report, there's like 5 guys that control DeSantis. So how can he take money from people who are making money in China and then try to present to people he's going to be tough on China?
Because I think that DeSantis is trying to run in this lane of, I think his instincts are probably right. He's sort of a MAGA populist. He's certainly been one as governor. He has consultants controlling him right now who are trying to force him into like a separate box, thinking that there's some imaginary lane there, when really, I mean, the country the Republican Party at least is a populist movement that's happening. And it just doesn't make any sense because nobody wants a tribute band when the real band is here. Donald Trump is the leader of this movement. And so Ron DeSantis instead should be a part of this movement, not attempting to lead it, but then kind of from a bizarre watered down place. And so I just think that they're desperate for cash. They're going to take it from anyone. It was given into a super PAC. We don't know what relationship it is that DeSantis has with Leon, but I think it just shows like how much he has lost control of his own campaign, his own message, because the vintage Ron DeSantis would rail about these things that we talk about. He'd be, apoplectic about what BlackRock is doing. He goes on and on about how the ESGs are terrible, but that was Governor Ron DeSantis. Candidate for President Ron DeSantis is completely lost. He gave 3 separate answers on the Ukraine issue. Like he's given now they're having him give answers that aren't even in any specific detail. It's just say you want to cut taxes. And it's just sad. It shows this man's career is being ruined and the life work he's been because some consultants are telling him to keep going. And there's no end game here for Ron DeSantis.
Carrie Lake's called for the primary for people to drop out and everybody to come together. Number 1, do you agree with that? And number 2, practically, how would that work?
Yes, I do agree that they should drop out. Now, I don't think they should be forced to in any way. Like they should make the decision to. But I think what she called for technically was to suspend their campaigns during this time and show support for President Trump in the middle of what is election interference by the opposing party. And separately, I do think that these candidates, it is time to drop out. I mean, they're polling in the single digits. There's no catching up with Donald Trump. We're wasting money. We're wasting time when the real enemy is on the march. The Democrats are on the march right now. They are raising millions and millions of dollars into 501c3s and C4s to run their get out the vote efforts. They have their candidate who's completely unopposed with the exception of RFK, who's actually making a good run at it, but there's no way they even allow RFK to come anywhere, near the candidacy. And so we are just busy doing what? I'm like, what is the good that comes out of this primary at this point? I don't know. I don't think there is anything. We need to start treating Donald Trump as the nominee because he is. There's no catching him in the polls right now. And so these candidates should do the right thing for the party, for the country, and step aside and recognize that they don't have a chance, but they can help to elect Donald Trump.
Caroline, how do people get to you on social media?
It's at Caroline Wren on Twitter and Getter and Truth Social.
Okay, Caroline, thanks. Thanks for taking time away to do this.
Sure.
Now, we've got a situation with a bioweapons lab that it looks like the Chinese not only own, but they probably constructed in California. At the same time, you've got a increasingly dangerous situation that's happening every day in Ukraine as people, as instead of negotiate, it's all about escalation. So we're going to get we got Ben Harnwell in Rome, and we got Colonel John Mills to break it down all for us. We're going to take a short commercial break here. We're going to return in the War Room in our afternoon show. I want to make sure everybody, today, your homework assignment, HomeTitleLock.com. Do not let cyber criminals get into your home title and take out a second mortgage on your home. If they do that with these hard money lenders, guess what? The hard money lender is going to say, hey, you took out or someone took out a $200,000 mortgage at 10% interest rates. Tough break for a swell guy or gal. You owe it. You're going to pay it. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. Check it out today. Make sure you're not exposed to some of the most dangerous criminals in the world, the cyber criminal. Short commercial break. Going to Rome next with Ben Harnwell, California with Colonel John Mills. All next.
Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, Ben Harnwell. Let's start there. I'm gonna get Colonel Mills in here. People's heads are gonna blow up on this bioweapon situation. Ben, the situation in Ukraine continues to deteriorate as the spring offensive or the counteroffensive, what do you want to call it, gets more lethal, right? And now there's a metastasization. They're metastasizing. You've got strikes of the Ukrainians into Moscow. Now you've got the situation on Belarus border. You've been warning about. At the entire time, every day I'm seeing some proclamation or something come out from some different group talking about the $500 billion to $1 trillion rebuilding of Ukraine that has to start immediately. And oh, by the way, it's the obligation of the West. This has to be done for the betterment of the West. Make it make sense to us, Ben Harnwell.
Good afternoon, Steve. Well, I don't know if I'll be able to attempt the impossible this evening, but I'll at least try and break it down for the War Room posse. There are two articles here. I'm going to start off with the Memphis. Well, let's start off with the first one here, 1A, which is the CNBC piece. For me, Steve, the news here is that these articles exist at all. 6 months ago, 3 months ago, articles with headlines like this. This is CNBC. Ukraine has tested its allies' patience with its military strategy and demands. Headlines like that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. Something is moving. The reason I really wanted to talk about this is because it confirms the analysis that the War Room pushed out, basically from Vilnius, which was the annual NATO conference onwards. And whilst Vilnius was taking place, we said, Steve, that there's a pivot taking place now, and it's a pivot away from NATO's hitherto policy of total escalation. There's a distance being put between the NATO allies and Kiev. This article here, interesting that it's CNBC. This isn't the War Room pushing these arguments now. This isn't National Pulse or Human Events. It's not even Newsmax. This is something dead hard in the sense of the mainstream media's establishment, and therefore, and in fact, the articles, both this one and the New York Times, what I'm going to call on next, they really, I think, they've been prompted from within the Biden administration itself, because this is evidence. This is the visible evidence of the invisible pivot that we were talking about, of slowly hanging President Zelensky out to dry. So just to give a couple of takeaways just from this article, and I will post this one on Getter. The articles I'm going to refer to today, I'm going to post them all on Getter. Talks about frustrations coming to a head. Talks about Ukraine's ongoing needs and demands. It talks about uncomfortable encounters. This is mood music that we haven't been privy to for the last 17 months of this campaign. for me, the key takeaway here, because it indicates that this is actually sourced from, it explicitly says it's sourced really from within the administration. It says, for some officials in Washington and London, Zelensky's decision to tell his staunch backers that Ukraine deserved respect as NATO met to discuss additional support for Kiev was a step too far. And there are further quotes here. One descriptive phrase says, a source with knowledge of the matter who asked to remain anonymous due to the sensitivity of the situation, told CNBC. It's not the usual disclaimer, source speaking, but asked to remain uncited because they're not authorized to speak on the record. No, this isn't that disclaimer. This disclaimer is that the subject matter is too sensitive. Here's the key quote then, Steve. So the US is strongly advising Ukraine not to do certain things, but Kiev does them anyway, brushing aside or not addressing US concerns. And they come at the United States or Washington or the Biden administration complaining about not being involved in NATO talks. So this is really the not only the public washing of dirty laundry, it's indicative that there's something going on deep now within this relationship with Ukraine. Now I'm going to call quickly on the New York Times article here. Headline: This is article 1B. Excellent, Memphis. Thank you. Ukrainian troops trained by the West stumble in battle. Again, this is a marked difference in tone from the propaganda that we've been fed right throughout the talks of the counteroffensive and what have you. And the whole tenor of this article is basically that the troops the West has promised, they've been trained up for 4 weeks, basically 6 weeks at most, sent into battle, and they are woefully undertrained for the task at hand of fighting Russia's experienced troops. And that's the tenor of this article. It's saying that the counteroffensive is going nowhere. It's really proof of what Professor Mearsheimer was saying right back at the beginning, that we're going to be fighting Russia down to the last Ukrainian. Again, this is the New York Times. This isn't an economic nationalist organ. The fact that this article is taking place, I would suggest, with the consent of the Biden administration. Why? Because there is a pivot in place. So what is this pivot? It's a pivot away from destruction towards reconstruction. And now I'm going to call Steve on, if Memphis would be so kind, to this article in The Hill. The Hill. The West's self-interest includes rebuilding Ukraine. Well, of course, our self-interest doesn't involve us impoverishing ourselves for the sake of a country with which we're not even an ally. There are two sentences here, however, that I will read because it very much is consonant with something that, again, we've been saying in the war room, pointing out in the war room right from day one. Here's the first extract. Donor countries led by the US have already given Ukraine at least $180 billion in military, financial, and humanitarian aid. And I'm going to go straight up to the very opening words of the article, because I think that there's a nice symmetry between these two sentences. The rebuilding of a shattered Ukraine will be a monumental task. A joint assessment led by the World Bank estimates the cost at $411 billion over 10 years. Obviously, as you said in your introduction, we're talking at least $1 trillion here. But here's what they're talking about now. See, they're already talking about committing twice the amount of money that has been spent thus far on the destruction on the reconstruction. And as on the war room we'd said, and I'll close with this, as we said right back at the beginning, these sociopaths who are pushing this, they actually want, the reason why they're forcing Ukraine to pursue an unwinnable war, they want to see the country leveled. Why? Well, they may be sociopaths, but they're not irrational, because the mother of all grifts will take place when it comes to the reconstruction. And this is what's being lined up. And we can see the moves taking place, tectonic shifts taking place slowly, but they are taking place. When we look at the early two articles from the New York Times and CNBC, and then this article in The Hill, and you can see how the propaganda is moving slowly away. Now, there is a final article which I will quickly call up on because I think it's ridiculous, but it does illustrate the state that we're in here. This is an article. This is the Breitbart article, article number 3, with the headline: Zelensky predicts Putin will die before winning against Ukraine. You know, I would normally in my hit concentrate on that, but I'm actually going to push that aside. Really, behind that statement, Zelensky is actually saying that he's talking about this being a war of attrition, that it's going to outlast Putin. That's fundamentally what he's saying. He says it's not going to last for 30 years, but it might last for 10 years, this war of attrition, by which stage Putin will be gone. Now, of course, from what I just said previous to this is not a war. It might have been a war of attrition. It might have been planned by the strategists in the Pentagon as a war of attrition 10 years ago. Now it's not a war of attrition. Now sort of the movements are moving away from President Zelensky. President Zelensky's authentic or genuine friends need to put him to one side and tell him that the grains of sand are falling now through the hourglass. If he wants to move in Ukraine's best interest, he needs to do this from a position of what strength he has at the negotiating table.
As he lectured us at Davos earlier in the year, that people that criticize the support of Ukraine had not read the memoirs of World War II, of which I'd opined at the time. I had forgotten more about the memoirs of World War II that I've read than he's ever read, and that he should focus on Halberstam's book, The Best and the Brightest, on the chapter on President Diem of South Vietnam. When the United States was finished with him, when they kicked him to the curb, they allowed the Vietnamese coup members to put him, his wife, and his brother up against the wall and shoot him. Or I guess in this case, technically, shoot him in the back of a truck in the way to the airport or on the tarmac. I think Zelensky ought to really focus on President Diem. When the West and the security services are finished with you, they're really finished with you. And you can tell that you're wearing out your welcome with the administrative and deep state. Ben, amazing, and you've come up with a great hook. The mother of all grifts, which you talked about in the very first time we got you on about the Ukraine, almost a year and a half ago or a year and 2/3 ago. Ben, we got to bounce. How do people get to all your content? Thank you for staying up with us and catching us up to speed on everything. How do people get to you?
Well, Steve, nothing is going to get my cynical, beady eyes glittering serpent-like in the moonlight more than talking about the reconstruction of Ukraine. Folks, if you want to catch up with me, do come to Get It. It's the best social media platform in the world. There I am. You just need to tab in my surname, Harnwell, at Harnwell. And I look forward to catching up. I've read, since I've been on this platform for 2 years, I have read every single comment that's ever been posted on my profile. So I look forward to the feedback.
So get on there and give comments. And by the way, we didn't even get time for my favorite article for Ben today, which is about Belarus repositioning troops on the Polish border, and now NATO's all up in arms. I'm sure there's no Wagner Special Forces guys associated with that at all. It's Ben Harnwell. Another called shot by Brother Harner. Getting pretty good on this military stuff. This geopolitical stuff is working out for you well, Ben. Ben, thank you so much. I appreciate you staying up with us.
Thank you so much, Steve. God bless.
From Rome, if I had time, I'd ask Colonel Mills about the Ukraine situation, but I really want to focus. This ties back to the Sequoia capital of it all. And this is, so Colonel Mills, just give me your assessment. People appreciate your technical knowledge. You and I have been going back and forth the last couple of days. You're quite concerned about this bioweapons lab in California, particularly the Chinese ownership, the opaqueness of who actually ran it, what's actually going on there. You're saying this is a ticking time bomb. Tell our audience what you mean by that.
Well, this whole event, Steve, and thank you, is what I call advanced force operations. And I've used that term several times. And the alarming thing is the DoD documents on the Joint Staff Library that describe advanced force operations are no longer public facing. 3.0 and 3.05 on the Joint Staff doctrine that was public facing. Why is it no longer public facing? Because we know the Chinese read it. I mean, they read everything. And that describes what advanced force operations are. All actions in preparation for conflict. All actions in preparation for conflict. And this Reedley lab just screams advanced force operations. Now, Is it any coincidence that less than 50 minutes away is 100% of our West Coast Navy fighter attack squadrons? That's over 200 of our F-18s and a growing number of F-35s in one place, which we need to, I've said it before, harden, disperse, and deceive as a deterrent measure. And we got all of our aircraft in one place right next to this biolab. And we have a standing contingency plan, con plan, to respond to domestic events, WMD events. I'm seeing no evidence. I can't give the plan name or number or anything like that. It not be appropriate, not allowed. But it's a very mature con plan, and I'm seeing no evidence it has been implemented or exercised. I'm going, what is going on here? There's very little reporting on
Colonel, hang on. I want to set the predicate first, because you're a guy that dealt with this for years. Are you saying that it looks like it's something from a third world nation? It doesn't look terribly organized. Are you saying you actually believe that instead of just being some off the books type of lab, and we know the California health authorities were on this for a while, but were just getting stiff armed and couldn't get any answers? Are you making the point that from the profile you've seen, regardless of what the ownership is or proven the ownership is, that this looks like it's some sort of bioweapons capability or potential capability? So therefore, DOD and the federal government have to kick into another mode about getting all over top of this, and not just the control of it, but the taking a part of it, because it falls under the doctrine of advanced force operations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just baffled. Maybe they're doing it and keeping it really quiet. I don't think so. I think because of wokeism and other factors, I'm just thinking of what's going on in the National Military Command Center right now, where I've had to do a lot of duty over the years. And has anybody bothered to call the duty general or admiral and to report this and spit up the interagency process? I mean, this is just the cancer and toxic nature of wokeism has destroyed strategic clarity of thought here. Is anybody awake? Is anybody watching what's going on here? And I'm concerned. I'm seeing no evidence. It would be tangible if that con plan had been triggered, and I'm not seeing any evidence of that right now. And again, what a coincidence! 200 plus of that is the singular base for all of our West Coast fighter squadrons for the Navy. And what in the world? I mean, that's the Rough Riders, the Flying Eagles, the Stinger,
Colonel, when you were at the National Military Command Center, just give me the 3 to 5 things, actions you would want to see that you could tell from outside in the public that actually were being done to give you a level of comfort that something's actually being done here.
Well, the duty general or admiral in the basement in the new National Military Command Center, that is literally the singular entry point for all actions to the Department of Defense. It doesn't go to the Secretary of Defense. It goes to the NMCC. And there's a whole very mature, very well exercised protocol of notification. And you literally pick up a phone. It's like the old days. We don't even know how to do this anymore, set up these phone lines, but you pick up a phone, bam, you have all departments and agencies on the line immediately, including the White House Situation Room. And you do that immediately. An alert comes in. You pick up the phone. All 18 cabinet agencies, White House Situation Room, and one of the first things you got to do is appoint a lead federal official. Everybody falls in line behind them here, and I'm just not seeing any evidence of this. We should be bouncing off the walls on this. I mean, until they've proven otherwise. The prudent and wise thing to do is implement the standing con plan on this, and then okay, we prove it or disprove it. Not seeing this.
Colonel, we got to bounce. I want everybody to get to your social media. We're going to be covering this more because, at least from the outside, given what they found the inside with the herpes and the COVID and the 900 or 1,000 dead mice or rats or whatever they had, I guess it was mice. It's quite disturbing what went on there, and it doesn't seem like there's any coordinated effort to get to the bottom of it or to control it. Colonel, what's your social media? How do they get to your books? How do they get to everything all your content?
Thank you, Steve. TheNationWillFollow.com, Firsthand Experiences Fighting the Deep State, prefaced by Stephen K. Bannon. You can pre-order book 2, War Against the Deep State, coming out in the fall. go to Mike Lindell, my store, to get autographed versions of The Nation Will Follow.com. Both places use code War Room. And I'm Colonel Rhett John, Colonel R.E.T. John on Substack, Getter, and Truth.
Colonel Mills, thank you. We're looking forward to getting an update from you in the next day or two on the situation in California and get your thoughts on Ukraine. Fantastic job. Okay, we're going to end today with the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It was a reprise of a song that we played before, but we're celebrating American music every day. Tomorrow is supposed to be the arraignment of Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. If that goes according to plan, Natalie Winters will be there on the scene, and we'll be covering it throughout the day. But we've got so much other stories that we haven't had time to get to because of what the deep state and the administrative state is trying to do to take out Donald J. Trump. Of course, we're going to have all the breaking news on that and much more tomorrow morning when we return in the War Room at 10 a.m. We'll see you then.